Have you ever felt completely invisible? Like your true worth, your secret talents, and your quiet sacrifices go completely unnoticed by the very people who have all the power. It's a deeply painful feeling, a form of humiliation many of us know all too well. But what if one day, the truth of who you are came out with the force of a tidal wave, so powerful that it caused the world of the person who scorned you to utterly collapse? That is the very heart of the incredible story we are about to unravel. This isn't just some corporate drama, it's a story that proves that destiny has a funny way of balancing the scales. We're going to show you exactly how a powerful billionaire's son collapses after a chef's secret daughter drops a BOMBSHELL, and believe me, when I say he's quitting, I mean he's ready to walk away from everything. It's a counterintuitive idea, isn't it? That someone with everything would give it all up because of a secret held by someone he considered a nobody. On one side, you have Blake Russell, a man born with so much power and privilege that he viewed his staff, especially the quiet server Naomi Cook, as less than human. He is the epitome of arrogance, the unchallenged king of his family's empire. On the other side, you have Naomi, the nearly invisible chef's daughter, working tirelessly in the shadows, enduring his contempt while carrying a secret legacy powerful enough to dismantle his entire reality. This is a plot twist you won't see coming. This is a profoundly emotional and heart-aching story about how one woman's hidden truth becomes the catalyst for a powerful man's complete undoing and eventual quest for redemption. It's about how a moment of shocking revelation can expose the rotten foundation of a great fortune, proving that true worth is never about money or power. The story promises a journey through arrogance, heartbreak, and the surprising path to a most unexpected love story. Get ready for a narrative so gripping, it will make you question everything you think you know about power and justice. We're about to witness how an act of profound kindness can be more powerful than $1 billion fortune, and how a single truth can force a man to his knees. The payoff of seeing this dynamic unfold is a reminder that the universe is always watching, and sometimes it delivers justice in the most shocking way imaginable. Before we dive into this incredible journey, I want to feel just how far our story has reached today. Could you do me a favor and comment below with the beautiful city you're watching from? I want to imagine the scene with all of you. And please, if you believe in the power of truth, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel so you don't miss what happens next, and sharing this with someone you know will be deeply touched by this amazing story. It wasn't supposed to end like this, not for him. Not for the billionaire's son, Blake Russell, a man sculpted from marble and arrogance, who believed the world was simply another asset to be managed. Yet here he was, the symphony of the clinking glasses and hushed whispers of his own restaurant, fading into a deafening roar in his ears. The words she spoke, a devastating bombshell delivered with quiet strength, echoed in the space where his pride used to be. It was a truth so profound, so utterly world-shattering, that his body couldn't contain the psychic impact. This was the moment of his total collapse. You see, the revelation wasn't just a piece of information, it was a wrecking ball to the very foundation of his identity. The woman standing before him was no longer just Naomi Cook, the quiet chef's daughter who moved through his world like a ghost. In an instant, she had become the embodiment of a history he never knew existed, a living, breathing plot twist that made his entire life feel like a fraud. This wasn't just a surprise, it was the cruel, beautiful hand of destiny rewriting his story without his consent. He felt the ground beneath him give way, a dizzying sensation of falling. His mind reeled, desperately trying to process the impossible. The humiliation was a physical force, a hot wave that washed over him, far more potent than any business failure he could have ever imagined. The thought of quitting wasn't a strategic retreat, it was a primal urge to escape his own skin, to shed the name Russell and the empire it represented. What was the point of it all? This kingdom he ruled with an iron fist, if it was all built upon a monumental deception. The sheer emotional weight was too much to bear for a man who always prided himself on control. Before him, Naomi stood with a poise that defied her station. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, resonant sadness. It was this unexpected display of grace, this profound kindness in the face of his life's undoing, that broke him more than the secret itself. He had viewed her as insignificant, a background character in his grand narrative. Now he saw that he was merely a flawed protagonist in her much more significant, heart-aching tale. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the very first time. The sharp intake of breath from the surrounding patrons was a distant sound as his vision tunneled. The world narrowed to her face, a face that held the key to a legacy he had wrongfully claimed. His knees buckled, the strength leaving his limbs as if severed by a blade. The collapse was not just physical, it was the shattering of a soul, the complete disintegration of Blake Russell, the billionaire's son. He was nothing. And in that nothingness, a desperate path toward a new beginning, a painful quest for redemption, flickered into existence. But how did it come to this? What sequence of events, what slow burn of arrogance and quiet suffering, led to such a spectacular and public undoing? To truly understand the gravity of this collapse, you have to go back. You have to witness the casual cruelty and the invisible strength that set the stage for this very moment. You have to understand the man Blake was to see the king ruling. A court of shadows, completely oblivious to the light that was about to set his world ablaze. In the gleaming world of haute cuisine, Blake Russell's flagship restaurant was his personal kingdom, and he ruled it less like a leader and more like a despot. To him, the staff were not a team, they were components in a machine, easily replaceable. And utterly beneath his notice, the billionaire's son moved through the dining room with an air of detached superiority, his eyes scanning for imperfections, not with the goal of improvement, but with the intent of asserting dominance. It was a cold, efficient, and soul-crushing environment, designed to serve his ego above all else. His management style was a masterclass in silent intimidation. He never raised his voice, for he didn't have to. A single disappointed glance from him was enough to make a seasoned sommelier break into a cold sweat. He believed that fear, not respect, was the most effective tool for ensuring perfection. This philosophy, of course, was a fragile shield for his own insecurities, a fact he would never admit. His pursuit of perfection was relentless, leaving no room for humanity, and certainly no room for the quiet server, Naomi Cook, the chef's daughter. Naomi, to him, was practically invisible. She was just another part of the scenery, a quiet presence who did her job without fuss or flair. He wouldn't have been able to pick her out of a lineup if his life depended on it. He saw her, but he didn't see her. She was simply the server, an extension of the kitchen her father ran, and therefore an object within his domain. This willful ignorance was a cornerstone of his power, for acknowledging the staff's humanity would mean acknowledging his own dependence on them. This calculated cruelty wasn't born in a vacuum. It was forged in the crucible of his father's expectations. A relentless pressure to be stronger, colder, and more successful than anyone else. Blake's iron fist was a direct inheritance, a misguided attempt to prove his worth to a patriarch who equated emotion with weakness. He was playing a role he thought was his destiny, unaware that his performance was hollowing him out, paving the way for a future emotional collapse he couldn't yet imagine. It was a lonely and brittle existence. He viewed his employees' deference not as loyalty, but as the natural order of things. It was his birthright. The idea that any of them, especially the unassuming Naomi, could possess a world of their own, filled with struggles, dreams, and a quiet strength that dwarfed his own, was simply inconceivable. This blindness would prove to be his greatest vulnerability, the fatal flaw in his carefully constructed empire. He was a king ruling a kingdom of ghosts, never realizing they were the ones with all the power. But while the billionaire's son played his part on the main stage, another story, a far more heart-aching one, was unfolding in the shadows of the bustling kitchen and the quiet corridors of the restaurant. It was a story of silent endurance and profound sacrifice. A story that belonged entirely to the woman he saw as no one, the chef's daughter, Naomi, and her world was about to be shaken to its core, forcing her from the shadows. Behind the swinging doors of the kitchen, a different kind of pressure existed, one measured not in profit margins, but in survival. Naomi Cook worked with a tireless, almost desperate energy. Every plate she carried, every table she cleared, was a small step towards a singular goal: supporting her ailing father, the restaurant's celebrated head chef. He was her whole world, the brilliant artist whose hands, once steady and masterful, were now starting to tremble with fatigue and illness. She was more than just the chef's daughter, she was his lifeline. She endured Blake Russell's chilling arrogance with a quiet grace that baffled her colleagues. While others flinched under his gaze, Naomi simply retreated further into herself, her focus unwavering. His cold dismissals were like water off a duck's back, insignificant compared to the real fear she harbored for her father's health. What was a moment of public humiliation compared to the private terror of losing the one person who mattered? Her resilience wasn't weakness, it was a testament to the depth of her love. Adding to her daily trials was the constant venomous scorn of Blake's fiancée, a woman who seemed to embody the worst aspects of wealth without any of its potential grace. She treated the staff as her personal playthings, and Naomi, with her quiet dignity, became her favorite target. The fiancé saw Naomi's humility not as a virtue, but as an invitation for contempt, a chance to reinforce her own fragile sense of superiority. It was a daily onslaught of petty cruelties and thinly veiled insults. Naomi weathered these storms with a deep well of patience, a silent strength inherited from her father. She knew her purpose extended far beyond serving meals. She was the keeper of her father's legacy, the guardian of his health, and the silent pillar supporting their small two-person family. Every condescending remark from Blake or his fiancée was a small price to pay. Her work was an act of devotion, a heart-aching display of a daughter's love that went completely unnoticed by the powers that be. Her kindness was her armor. Even when faced with the most overt disdain, she responded with unwavering professionalism and a gentle spirit. This wasn't subservience, it was a conscious choice. She refused to let their bitterness poison her, to let their world of hollow extravagance diminish her own rich, internal life. This inner fortitude was a secret she kept well, a quiet rebellion of the spirit that was far more powerful than any outburst would have been. She was playing a long game, guided by love and a sense of destiny. But the universe, it seems, has a way of forcing things into the light. A quiet endurance can only hold for so long before a single catastrophic event shatters the peace. A storm was brewing, one that would move from the realm of private suffering to public spectacle. The fiancé's casual cruelty was about to escalate, creating a scene that would test the limits of Naomi's strength and expose the true nature of Blake's character for all to see. The breaking point arrived on a busy Tuesday night, the restaurant buzzing with the city's elite. It was then that Blake's fiancée decided to stage her cruelest performance yet. A spilled glass of water, a minor accident, became her excuse. She rose from her seat, her voice sharp and loud enough to cut through the ambient chatter, and directed a torrent of abuse at Naomi. She called her clumsy, incompetent, and an insignificant speck in a world she didn't belong in. The public humiliation was brutal and deliberate. Every word was a carefully chosen dart, designed to inflict maximum damage. The fiancé painted Naomi as a charity case, a bumbling fool who was lucky to even be breathing the same rarefied air. The patrons at nearby tables fell silent, their forks hovering over their plates as they watched the unfolding drama. Naomi stood frozen, tray in hand, her face pale but her eyes steady. She didn't flinch or cry. Her dignity was a silent, powerful shield against the onslaught. This display of inner strength was a stark contrast to the fiancé's loud insecurity. And where was the billionaire's son in all of this? Blake Russell stood just a few feet away, a silent witness to the entire ugly affair. He saw the venom in his fiancée's eyes, heard the cruelty in her voice, and saw the unfairness of the attack. He saw Naomi, his employee, being torn down in the middle of his establishment. It was a moment that called for a leader, a man of character, to step in and defend the innocent. A simple word from him would have ended it all. But Blake said nothing. He remained silent, his face an unreadable mask of indifference. In that moment, his inaction was a choice, a loud and clear endorsement of his fiancée's behavior. He chose his alliance with wealth and power over basic human decency and kindness. His silence was a betrayal, not just of Naomi, but of any moral code he might have claimed to possess. He watched her humiliation, and by doing nothing, he became a participant in it. It was a quiet, damning failure of character. After her tirade, the fiancée flicked her wrist in a dismissive gesture, and Naomi, with quiet composure, simply cleaned up the mess and walked away. She didn't offer an excuse or an apology, for she had done nothing wrong. Her silent retreat was more powerful than any retort. It left a lingering, uncomfortable silence in its wake, an unspoken judgment on the two people who had just revealed their true, ugly selves. This moment of profound humiliation would become a turning point. As the restaurant's chatter slowly resumed, and seed of consequence had been planted, Blake's inaction had been noted, not just by the staff who now saw him as a coward, but by someone else. A quiet diner in the corner, a man whose opinion carried more weight than Blake could possibly imagine, had witnessed the entire exchange. And his judgment was about to threaten the very foundations of the Russell empire in a way Blake never saw coming. Unbeknownst to Blake, the quiet diner in the corner was Arthur Vance, the most influential food critic in the country. A single review from him could make or break a restaurant overnight. He had come unannounced, seeking an authentic experience. What he got, initially, was a front-row seat to Blake's arrogance. Blake, in his usual fashion, had been dismissive and cold when Vance had asked a simple question about the menu earlier, treating him like an ignorant tourist rather than a valued guest. It was a terrible first impression. Vance was already composing a scathing mental draft of his review, focusing on the soulless atmosphere and the owner's appalling rudeness. The Russell Empire's flagship was feeling less like a temple of fine dining and more like a mausoleum. He was about to write the place off completely, another victim of inherited wealth and a lack of passion. The public humiliation of the server was just the rotten cherry on top of a very disappointing cake. He saw no path to redemption for this establishment. But then came Naomi. After the dreadful scene with the fiancé, it was she who was assigned to Vance's table. He watched as she approached, expecting to see a defeated, shaken employee. Instead, he was met with a quiet, professional grace that was utterly astonishing. She didn't mention the incident. Instead, she spoke about the food, with a soft-spoken passion and a depth of knowledge that took him by surprise. It was as if she were channeling the heart of the chef himself. Her exceptional kindness and meticulous attention to detail were a balm to the evening's harshness. She noticed his slight hesitation over the wine list and recommended a lesser-known vintage that paired perfectly with his chosen meal, explaining its origins with a heartaching story about the vineyard. She anticipated his needs before he was aware of them himself. It was a masterclass in service, not born from rigid training, but from a genuine, deep-seated empathy. She was single-handedly salvaging the entire experience. Vance was fascinated. Here was a stark contrast, the hollow arrogance of the billionaire's son versus the profound, authentic grace of the chef's daughter. She wasn't just serving him food, she was offering him a moment of genuine connection, a brief glimpse into the soul that was supposed to inhabit this restaurant. It was a surprise that completely upended his initial conclusions. She was the restaurant's secret weapon, its hidden heart, and her boss was completely oblivious to it. As he paid the bill, Vance knew his review had fundamentally changed. It would no longer be a simple takedown. It would be a more complex story, a tale of two worlds colliding within one establishment. He would have to write about the appalling behavior of the owner, but he would also have to praise the transcendent kindness of one remarkable server. He left the restaurant with a profound sense of curiosity, wondering how such a gem could exist in such a toxic environment. The repercussions of his pending review were about to send shockwaves all the way to the top. The shockwaves arrived a week later, not in the form of a public review, but as a private, thunderous phone call. Blake's father, the formidable patriarch of the Russell Empire, had received a courtesy call from his old acquaintance, Arthur Vance. The critic had spared no detail, recounting Blake's rudeness, the fiance's vile behavior, and the declining, soulless reputation of their flagship restaurant. The patriarch was not concerned, he was furious. The call was a warning shot, and he felt the impending humiliation. He summoned Blake to his cavernous, intimidating office, a room that had been the site of many lectures, but never one this severe. He expressed his grave concern, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The Russell name, he explained, was not just about money, it was about a reputation for excellence, a reputation Blake was single-handedly tarnishing. The restaurant wasn't just a business, it was the cornerstone of their culinary legacy, the very heart of the empire. And under Blake's watch, its heartbeat was fading. The pressure on the billionaire's son became immense, a crushing weight that eclipsed any he had felt before. His father didn't shout, he dissected Blake's failures with surgical precision. He spoke of declining profits, waning public interest, and now, the potential for a catastrophic review from the one critic who truly mattered. He made it clear that Blake's position was not guaranteed. The unspoken threat of being stripped of his title, of quitting not by choice but by force, hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Blake felt a genuine tremor of fear. His father's disappointment was a familiar burden, but this was different. This was a threat to his entire identity. He had built his world on the foundation of being the heir, the successor. The thought of that being taken away felt like a kind of death, a collapse of his very being. He left the meeting with his father's words ringing in his ears, "Fix it, or I will find someone who can." The ultimatum was clear. His mind raced, desperately seeking a path to redemption. He knew another major critic was scheduled to visit in a few weeks for a final decisive review. This would be his last chance. Everything had to be perfect. The food, the service, the atmosphere, all had to be flawless. The pressure to succeed was no longer about pride, it was about survival. He was cornered, and like a cornered animal. His judgment was becoming clouded by panic. He returned to the restaurant not with a new strategy, but with a renewed sense of desperation. His focus narrowed, his anxiety mounting with each passing day. The upcoming review became the single most important event of his life. Little did he know, a far more emotional and personal crisis was brewing right under his nose. In the heart of his kitchen, a crisis that would make the critic's review the least of his worries and set the stage for a plot twist of epic proportions. Just days before the crucial review, the brewing crisis erupted. Naomi's father, the culinary genius who had been the quiet engine of the restaurant for decades, suffered a sudden severe health crisis mid-service. The years of tireless work, the stress, and his underlying illness had finally caught up to him. He collapsed in the kitchen, his chef's whites a stark contrast to his ashen face. Panic rippled through the staff as he was rushed to the hospital. His condition uncertain, it was a devastating emotional blow. The kitchen, once a realm of disciplined artistry, was plunged into chaos. He wasn't just the head chef, he was their mentor, their father figure, the calm center of their frantic world. Without his leadership, the well-oiled machine ground to a halt. The sous chefs were skilled, but they lacked his intuitive brilliance, his palate, the secret touch that elevated his dishes from mere food to high art. With the most important review of their careers looming, they were now a ship without a captain, adrift in a sea of panic. Naomi was shattered. She rushed to the hospital, her world shrinking to the sterile white walls of the emergency room and the rhythmic beeping of machines. The sight of her father, so frail and vulnerable, was a pain deeper than any she had ever known. This was the moment she had been dreading, the fear that had fueled her every action. The chef's daughter now faced the potential loss of her anchor, her inspiration, her everything. The restaurant and its problems felt 1,000,000 miles away. News of the chef's collapse reached Blake not as a tragedy, but as a logistical nightmare. His first thought wasn't for the well-being of the man who had built his restaurant's reputation, but for the impending review. How could this happen now? His mind, already warped by pressure and fear, saw this not as a human crisis but as a direct personal sabotage to his last chance at redemption. He was incapable of empathy, blinded by his own desperate ambition. The timing was, in his mind, a cruel twist of destiny, a cosmic joke at his expense. He paced his office like a caged tiger, his fear quickly curdling into a volatile, irrational anger. He needed someone to blame, a target for his spiraling panic. In his distorted view, the problem wasn't his father's failing health, but the disruption it caused. And in his search for a scapegoat, his mind settled on the one person at the center of this personal storm, Naomi. He saw her not as a grieving daughter, but as the source of his problem. The chaos in the kitchen, the uncertain future, the ticking clock of the review, it all traced back to her family. An ugly, indefensible thought began to form in his mind, an accusation he was about to hurl without a shred of evidence or decency. He was about to confront a heartbroken daughter and make her personal tragedy all about himself. Fueled by panic and a stunning lack of self-awareness, Blake stormed through the restaurant in search of Naomi. He found her in a quiet corner, her phone pressed to her ear as she got a grim update from the hospital. He didn't wait for her to finish. He launched into a tirade, his voice sharp with accusation. He berated her, his words a torrent of blame. In his twisted logic, the stress of her needs, her presence, must have been the reason for her father's collapse. It was a new, breathtaking low. He accused her of distracting her father, of bringing her personal problems into his professional kitchen, and thereby jeopardizing the entire operation. It was a baseless, cruel attack, the desperate lashing out of a man terrified of his own failure. The billionaire's son, in his moment of supreme pressure, revealed the true poverty of his character. He took a daughter's profound grief and tried to frame it as an act of professional negligence. The humiliation he inflicted was immense and unforgivable. Naomi listened, her face a mask of disbelief. The shock of his accusation was so profound it momentarily eclipsed her grief. That this man, this hollow shell of a person, could be so monstrous as to blame her for her own father's illness was beyond comprehension. He was not just arrogant, he was cruel to his very core. The man she had pitied for his emotional emptiness was now someone she truly despised. A fire ignited within her, a cold, hard resolve she didn't know she possessed. She didn't argue or defend herself. What was the point? Arguing with a man like Blake was like trying to reason with a hurricane. She simply absorbed the verbal assault, her silence a mirror reflecting his own ugliness back at him. When he was finished, breathless from his own vile rant, she looked at him, her eyes clear and steady despite the unshed tears. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice quiet but laced with steel. The question hung in the air, a judgment he was too self-absorbed to understand. He stormed off, convinced he had asserted his authority and laid blame where it was due, never once considering the consequences of his actions. He had just pushed a grieving, heartbroken woman to her absolute limit. He believed the situation was hopeless, that the review was lost, and that his fate was sealed. He had given up, ready to face his father's wrath and the collapse of his career. He was completely unaware of the plot twist his cruelty had just set in motion. Because in that moment of ultimate humiliation, something inside Naomi shifted. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak upon her shoulders, but now it was joined by a fierce, protective fire. He had insulted not just her, but her father's legacy. He had declared the battle lost. But the chef's daughter was not ready to surrender. An audacious, impossible idea began to form in her mind. A secret plan for redemption, not for Blake, but for her father. Unbeknownst to Blake, who was wallowing in his office picturing his own demise, a quiet revolution was taking place in the heart of his chaotic kitchen. After her encounter with him, Naomi Cook walked through the swinging doors, not as a server, but as an heir. With her father's life hanging in the balance, she knew she couldn't let his legacy crumble due to the panic of a coward. She, the secret daughter of a culinary genius, would take the helm. It was a breathtakingly bold move. She tied on an apron, her movements fluid and certain. The kitchen staff, lost and demoralized, watched her with a mixture of shock and awe. But when she began to speak, her voice calm and assured, they saw her father in her eyes. She knew every recipe, every technique, every secret he had ever taught her. She had spent a lifetime absorbing his art, not through formal training, but through love and osmosis. This was her birthright, her destiny. She began to direct the kitchen with an authority that was both gentle and absolute. She didn't just replicate her father's classic dishes, she honored them. She perfectly executed his signature recipes, the foundations of the restaurant's fame, ensuring the core of his genius remained intact. The staff, recognizing the familiar rhythm and standard, fell into line, their panic replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. A flicker of hope returned to the beleaguered kitchen. But then, she did something remarkable. On top of her father's perfect foundations, Naomi began to add her own brilliant, modern twist. A surprising herb here, a daring plating technique there. A subtle change in a sauce that elevated it from classic to contemporary. It was a surprise for the kitchen staff, a glimpse of her own, previously hidden talent. She was not just her father's shadow, she was an artist in her own right, a fact she had kept hidden from the world. This was the ultimate plot twist, unfolding in secret behind closed doors, while the billionaire's son was busy orchestrating his own failure. The quiet server he had just humiliated was orchestrating the restaurant's salvation. It was an act of incredible defiance and profound love. She was cooking with her whole heart, channeling her grief and her anger into every dish, creating something truly extraordinary. It was a deeply emotional and personal act of creation. The first plates began to leave the kitchen, masterpieces of flavor and presentation. They were familiar yet new, classic yet innovative. The waiters carrying them out had no idea of the secret drama that had just transpired. They only knew that, somehow, against all odds, the kitchen had not only recovered, but had produced something magical. The stage was now set for a revelation, but not the one anyone was expecting. Blake was about to taste the truth, and it would blow his world apart. Sulking in his office, Blake was startled by his restaurant manager, who insisted he come and taste what was coming out of the kitchen. Reluctantly, he agreed, expecting to find a disaster he could use as further proof of his hopeless situation. A plate was set before him. He picked up his fork, took a bite, and froze. It was a flavor he recognized, the soul of his restaurant, her father's signature dish. But it was also something more. It was brighter, bolder, more alive than he had ever tasted it before. He took another bite, his mind reeling. This wasn't a dish made by a panicked sous chef. This was the work of a master. A second plate arrived, a completely new creation, and it was a revelation. The complexity, the balance, the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just good food, it was genius. This was the kind of food that didn't just earn good reviews, it built legends. A jolt of adrenaline, of hope, shot through him. This was the surprise of a lifetime. In a complete reversal of his earlier despair, the billionaire's son was suddenly electric with excitement. He didn't know how, and he didn't know who, but a miracle had happened. Someone in that chaotic kitchen was not just holding things together, they were revolutionizing it. He saw his salvation on a plate. This was his path to redemption, delivered to him by a mysterious, faceless savior. He was completely re-energized, his panic replaced by a manic glee. Without a moment's hesitation, he strode out into the dining room. He grabbed a glass and clinked it for attention, a broad, triumphant smile on his face. He announced to the patrons, and to the powerful critic he knew was dining among them, that he was proud to be witnessing a new chapter for his restaurant. It seems, he declared with theatrical flair, that in the midst of crisis, I have discovered a genius new chef. A new star is born tonight. The dining room erupted in applause. Blake beamed, soaking in the adoration, taking credit for a discovery he had yet to make. He promised the critic and the world that this new talent would be the future of the Russell culinary empire. He felt a strange sense of destiny, as if this was all meant to be. He had been tested, and in his eyes, he had triumphed by unearthing this incredible new talent. The irony of the situation was completely lost on him. He was now a man on a mission. He had to find this mystery chef, this hidden genius who had saved him from ruin and public humiliation. He turned towards the kitchen, ready to bestow lavish praise and a massive reward upon his new hero. He envisioned a dramatic scene, a stir-burn moment. He had no idea that the genius he was about to search for was the very same woman he had verbally crucified just hours earlier, the secret daughter of the man she was so brilliantly honoring. With a renewed sense of purpose, Blake burst into the kitchen, his eyes scanning the bustling space for the genius new chef he had just announced. He expected to find a seasoned professional, perhaps a visiting chef who had stepped in as a favor. He asked the sous chef, "Who is it? Who is responsible for this?" But the kitchen staff, fiercely loyal to Naomi and her family, merely shrugged and exchanged knowing glances. They would not be the ones to betray her secret. Naomi, having heard his grand announcement from the doorway, had slipped away, her apron discarded, melting back into the shadows of the restaurant. She knew Blake's praise was not for her, Naomi Cook, the quiet server. It was for an anonymous, idealized genius. If he discovered the truth, she felt certain his praise would curdle into fury. The humiliation of being saved by the woman he scorned would be too much for his fragile ego. He wouldn't reward her, he would fire her on the spot. So began a frustrating cat-and-mouse game. Blake, the determined billionaire's son, repeatedly tried to find and reward his mystery chef. He offered bonuses, promotions, public accolades, anything to lure the hidden talent out of the woodwork. But at every turn, he was met with a wall of silence. Naomi, with the help of the loyal staff, ensured her identity remained the kitchen's most guarded secret. It was a plot twist Blake simply couldn't solve. This frustrating search, however, began to have an unexpected effect on him. In his quest to find the mystery chef, he started spending more time in the parts of the restaurant he usually ignored. He spoke to the dishwashers, the line cooks, the service people he had always seen as furniture. He was looking for clues, but what he found was something else entirely. He began to see the inner workings of the world he thought he knew. It was a surprising education. He started to notice the deep, unwavering loyalty the entire staff had for Naomi's family. They spoke of her father with a reverence that bordered on worship, and of Naomi with a fierce, protective affection. He heard stories of her kindness, of the small, unseen acts of generosity she performed daily. They weren't just colleagues, they were a family, bound together by a respect that Blake, with all his money and power, had never been able to command. A strange and unfamiliar feeling began to stir within him: admiration. He was beginning to admire the woman he once scorned, even if he didn't fully realize it. He admired her strength, her resilience, the loyalty she inspired. This admiration was tangled up with his obsession with her genius alter ego. He was slowly, unknowingly, falling for both sides of the same person, the secret daughter and the brilliant chef. A love story was beginning, and he didn't even know her name. The days leading up to the big review were transformative for Blake. His futile search for the mystery chef forced him to look at his own restaurant through a completely new lens. He was no longer just the king in his castle, he was an investigator, a seeker of truth. And the more he looked, the more he saw. He saw the way the staff worked together, not out of fear of him, but out of a shared respect for the standards Naomi's father had set. It was a culture he had inherited but never understood. He began to see Naomi not as the insignificant server, but as the quiet center of this loyal universe. He watched her from afar, noticing the small details for the first time. He saw the way a young busboy's face would light up when she offered a quiet word of encouragement. He saw how the stern sous chef would soften his tone when speaking with her. Her kindness was the invisible thread holding the entire tapestry of the restaurant together. It was a profoundly heart-aching revelation, a strange and unsettling. Admiration began to bloom in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was respect, yes, but it was more than that. It was a fascination with her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of the humiliation he himself had caused. He replayed that ugly scene in his mind, his own words echoing with a new, horrifying clarity. For the first time, he felt a genuine pang of shame. This was the beginning of his unwilling path to redemption. He started to connect the dots, however. Slowly, the staff's loyalty to Naomi's family, the sudden miraculous improvement in the food after her father's collapse. The clues were all there. But his own arrogance, his own inability to see her as anything more than what had always believed her to be, created a mental block. The truth was too much of a plot twist for him to accept. He couldn't reconcile the quiet server with the culinary genius. This internal conflict made him softer, more observant, more human. The iron fist began to loosen its grip. The staff noticed the change. The air of terror that used to precede him was slowly being replaced by a hesitant curiosity. The billionaire's son was changing, being reshaped by the influence of a woman whose power he was only just beginning to comprehend. A most unlikely love story was beginning to germinate in the ashes of his pride. As the night of the big review finally arrived, the restaurant was electric with a new kind of energy. It wasn't just the nervous tension of a review, it was a sense of hope, of shared purpose. Blake stood at the pass, watching the exquisite plates go out, each one a testament to the hidden genius in his kitchen. He felt a surge of pride, but it was a new, humbler kind of pride. His fate and his heart now rested in the hands of a woman whose identity was the biggest secret of all. The night of the big review was a symphony of perfection. Every dish that left the kitchen was a masterpiece, a perfect blend of tradition and innovation. The air was thick with anticipation. Blake watched the critic, a notoriously hard-to-please woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Arthur, but just as feared, and for the first time, he saw a look of genuine delight on her face. A fragile sense of hope began to build within him. Perhaps this quest for redemption was actually within his grasp. Course after course, the magic continued. The food was more than just technically perfect, it was emotional. It told a story. The critic and the other patrons were not just eating, they were on a journey. Naomi, hidden away in the kitchen, was pouring every ounce of her love, her grief, and her newfound strength onto every plate. She was cooking for her father, for his legacy, for every staff member who had shown her kindness. It was the performance of a lifetime. As the dessert plates were cleared, Eleanor Vance laid down her fork, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. She signaled for the manager. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment of judgment. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs. He had done everything he could, placing his faith in a mysterious genius he had never met. The fate of the Russell Empire rested on this single verdict, this one woman's opinion. But the critic didn't want to speak to the manager. She didn't want to speak to the owner either. She rose from her seat, her voice clear and commanding as it echoed through the silent dining room. "That was not just a meal," she announced, her eyes gleaming with passion. "That was the meal of a lifetime. A work of art. I will not leave this establishment until I meet the chef responsible for it. I must shake the hand of the genius in that kitchen." The demand hung in the air, a royal decree that could not be refused. It was a moment of ultimate triumph, but for Blake, it was also a moment of pure terror. The surprise request had turned his dream into a nightmare. He had publicly staked his reputation on a new chef that he, in reality, couldn't produce. The staff looked at each other, then towards the kitchen doors, their faces a mixture of pride and panic. The secret was about to come out. All eyes turned to the swinging doors of the kitchen. The demand was absolute. The critic was waiting. The patrons were waiting. Blake was frozen, his mind a blank slate of horror. He had no one to present. The plot twist he had been unable to solve was about to be revealed in the most public and dramatic way imaginable. The universe was calling his bluff, and the hand of destiny was about to force the secret daughter out of the shadows and into the spotlight. The silence in the dining room stretched for an eternity. The kitchen doors remained closed. Blake felt a cold sweat prickle his brow, the triumph of the evening curdling into a nauseating dread. His fiancée stood beside him, whispering furiously, "Well, get the chef, don't just stand there." But he couldn't move. He was trapped between the critic's demand and his own lie. The impending humiliation was going to be biblical. This was a bombshell, waiting to detonate. Then, slowly, one of the kitchen doors swung open. But it wasn't a proud, unknown male chef who emerged. It was Naomi Cook. She had taken off her apron but was still in her simple server's uniform, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked small and vulnerable in the grand dining room, yet she walked with a quiet, unshakable dignity. She stopped before the critic's table, her eyes filled with a profound and emotional mix of fear and resolve. A collective gasp swept through the room. Patrons who recognized her as their server murmured in confusion. But the critic, Eleanor Vance, just stared at her, a slow smile of understanding dawning on her face. "It was you," she said, her voice soft with awe. "You are the artist." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Destiny had arrived, and it was wearing a server's uniform. Naomi, the secret daughter, simply nodded, unable to speak. Blake and his fiancée were left utterly, completely speechless. Their faces were a comical mask of horror and disbelief. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis. Blake's mind struggled to compute the reality before him. The clumsy server? The insignificant girl he had berated and humiliated. She was the genius? It was an impossible plot twist, a reality so staggering that his brain refused to accept it. His entire perception of her, of his world, was crumbling in real time. The fiancée was the first to find her voice, a strangled, incredulous laugh. "Her? Don't be ridiculous. She's a waitress." "This is some kind of joke," she spat, her face contorted with jealousy and rage. But her words lacked conviction. The truth was standing right in front of them, a quiet testament to a reality they had refused to see. Naomi's brilliance didn't need a defense, it had already been served on every plate that evening. For Blake, the world began to spin. The faces, Of the diners, the critic, his fiancée, all blurred into a dizzying vortex. The only thing in focus was Naomi, and in her eyes, he didn't see triumph. He saw the pain he had caused her, the kindness he had trampled on, and the immense talent he had been too blind to recognize. The shock was a physical blow, but just as he thought he could process it, the sound of another voice, deep and familiar, cut through the chaos from the restaurant entrance. The final bombshell was about to drop. The voice from the entrance belonged to the patriarch himself, Blake's father. He walked into the stunned silence of the dining room, his gaze sweeping over the scene before settling on Naomi with an expression of profound, weary sadness. He hadn't come to celebrate his son's victory. He had come to witness a truth he had kept hidden for far too long. He walked past his speechless son and stood beside Naomi, a silent gesture of solidarity that shocked everyone. "Blake," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of years of deception, "you are looking at the truth of our family's success." He then turned to the stunned crowd. "I think it's time everyone knew the real story." What followed was the ultimate bombshell, a revelation that would not just shatter Blake's world, but rewrite the entire history of the Russell Empire. It was the final devastating plot twist in this incredible saga. He revealed that Naomi's father, the brilliant chef currently lying in a hospital bed, was not just an employee. He was his original partner, the true culinary artist behind every one of their signature dishes, the very soul of the empire. "I was the businessman," the patriarch confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "But he was the magic. I built the brand, but he built the legacy. It was his genius, his recipes, that you all fell in love with." The patriarch went on to explain that, years ago, when the chef fell into debt, he had bought out his partners' share for a fraction of its worth, reducing the master to an employee in his own temple of cuisine. Naomi wasn't just the chef's daughter, she was the secret daughter of the empire's true founder. She was the rightful heir to the culinary legacy that Blake had so arrogantly claimed as his own birthright. Her talent wasn't a surprise, it was an inheritance. The weight of this final revelation was too much for Blake to bear. Every cruel word he had ever spoken to Naomi, every moment of arrogance, every ounce of condescension, came crashing down on him. The public humiliation he had inflicted upon her was nothing compared to the private humiliation he now felt. He hadn't just been cruel to a server, he'd been desecrating the legacy of the man his own father had cheated. He was a fraud, wearing a crown that belonged to her. He looked at Naomi, truly seeing her for the first time not as a server, not as a secret chef, but as royalty in exile. The quiet kindness she had always shown him, even in the face of his cruelty, now seemed like an act of unbelievable grace. She was the heir he had scorned, the heart of the operation he had tried to rule with an iron fist. A deep, guttural sound of despair escaped his lips. The foundation of his world had been obliterated. This was it. This was the collapse. The combined weight of his cruelty and the staggering truth was a physical force. Blake Russell, the powerful billionaire's son, felt his legs give way. The strength drained from his body as the magnitude of his failure washed over him. He staggered backward, his hand clutching his chest as he fought for air, the faces around him blurred. The only thing he could see was Naomi Cook, the true heir, her expression not of triumph, but of a deep, heart-aching pity. That look, that final act of kindness, was what ultimately broke him. He collapsed. It was not a dramatic fall, but a slow, heavy crumpling to the floor, the physical manifestation of a soul surrendering. Lying there on the cold marble, looking up at the glittering chandeliers of a world he no longer belonged to, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The empire, the money, the tidlight was all meaningless, a hollow prize in a game he had already lost. The only thing that mattered was the forgiveness of the woman looking down at him. This was his moment of painful, brutal redemption. In quitting, He whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of a final, irrevocable decision. He wasn't just quitting his job, he was abdicating his title, his name, his entire fraudulent identity. He was shedding the skin of the billionaire's son to reveal the broken man underneath. The gasp from his fiancée was a distant, irrelevant sound. In that moment of complete and utter humiliation, he had never felt more free. He struggled to his feet, his eyes never leaving Naomi's. The journey ahead was terrifying. He would have to rebuild himself from nothing, earn respect not through power, but through action. He knew he was unworthy of her forgiveness, of the incredible grace she possessed. But the flicker of a new destiny ignited within the ruins of his old one. It was a long, arduous path, but it was the only one that led somewhere real. This wasn't the end of their story, but the explosive start of a new, far more complex one. It was the beginning of a true love story, one that would have to be built not on shared joy, but on the difficult terrain of apology and atonement. He, the man who had everything, now had only one goal: to prove himself worthy of the woman who had nothing but was, in fact, everything. He took a single hesitant step towards her, the silent plea for a chance clear in his eyes. He would do anything, sacrifice everything, to earn back a fraction of the dignity he had so carelessly tried to strip from her. The ultimate plot twist of his life was not that she was the heir, but that his own salvation lay entirely in her hands. He had to prove he was worthy of Naomi Cook's forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, her love. What an absolutely incredible journey that was. We witnessed a powerful dynasty built on a secret, a billionaire's son brought to his knees by a truth he was too arrogant to see, and a quiet chef's daughter who reclaimed her legacy not with vengeance, but with quiet strength and breathtaking talent. It's a powerful reminder that the universe has a strange and beautiful way of balancing the scales, and that true power is rarely as loud or as shiny as we're led to believe. The story of Blake and Naomi is a testament to the fact that a genuine collapse can sometimes be the only way to build something real. Their story took us on a true emotional roller coaster, from the depths of profound humiliation to the hope of a hard-earned redemption. It's a narrative that forces us to ask ourselves what we value more: the comfort of a lie or the difficult, messy, but ultimately liberating power of the truth. Blake's path forward won't be easy, and Naomi's forgiveness is something that must be earned, not just given. Theirs is a love story that will be built on the foundations of a truly epic plot twist. Now I would love to hear your truth. What part of this heart-aching story impacted you the most? Was it the moment Blake finally saw Naomi's worth? Or was it the ultimate bombshell dropped by his father? Please share what moved you in the comments below. I'm also incredibly curious, did you expect an ending like this? Or were you hoping for a different desfecho for them? Let me know if you were satisfied with this new beginning. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by giving this video a like. It truly helps our channel reach others who need to hear stories like this. And if you haven't joined our community yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have a library full of older videos with powerful stories for you to explore, and you definitely don't want to miss the incredible journeys we have coming up next. Thank you for sharing this experience with us today.